We're both realizing the other one's in charge.
Hello. Yeah, the other, that's a really polite way of saying that we don't know what we're doing and that we don't have a plan for figuring it out. It's like 2 of 2. Okay, but nevertheless, I think for the first time ever, this podcast is being live streamed to the YouTubes, which means it's recorded.
That's awesome.
Oh, God.
It'll be available for later. So Elias,
Hi.
not only was the pressure on before, but now whatever pressure you felt is being multiplied by the infinity of time that is in the future, until we all live on Mars, at which point I assume YouTube, they're not going to get YouTube.
Yeah,
That's fine. I'm good at living with regret, so I'll be fine.
Good. Okay, so this will live on forever, but no pressure.
Yeah.
But it's going to define you as a person.
Yeah, no pressure.
Anyway, what are we here? So we're here. This is great. Welcome to the episode 3603 of the Thinkful Podcast. That is the number of the ID that exists in our database for this workshop room.
Mm-hmm.
Very scientific. We have a very special guest, Elias. Say hello.
Hello.
Good. So far, so good. I don't think we've ever spoken in anything but Slack yet before, have we?
I saw last week.
You were there in person. That was you in person?
Yeah, that was me last week.
Small world. Oh, right. That's true. I even spoke to you.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
I am not on mute. I'm not supposed to be on mute.
Okay.
Because I'm the one with the microphone.
Sure. Should I
just
talk about myself for a little bit? Or
what spaces you've been.
All right.
You can hear me twice because we're in the same place.
Elias, introduce yourself.
Yeah, I guess I can do that.
Student running a podcast. Has this happened before, Darrell?
A student running a podcast?
Yeah.
Wait, he's running the podcast?
Wow.
All right, cool. Pressure's off for me.
You're welcome, Darrell.
No, this has not happened. I can say confidently this has not happened. I'm Darrell, your guest today on the Thinkful Podcast, co-founder, CEO here at Thinkful. Ben A.
Also guest, host and interviewer.
Host and interviewer. And then Elias, yes, please introduce yourself.
Thank you, co-host. My name is Elias, obviously. I have been a student at Thinkful since, December of last year. And I wanted to do this because I see Thinkful making really great steps toward inclusiveness as a concept for its employer pool and its student pool, but there's not a lot of great discussion about disability as an axis of marginalization and everything. So that's kind of why we're here. There's a lot of cool stuff that Ben wants to cover, and then I have some data on this issue as a workforce issue as well, specifically.
Yeah, when I first really got introduced to this as a large-scale issue, I was startled by just the numbers. So I'd like to share some of them with you. 1 in 3 people with a disability lives in poverty. In places like the U.S., 50 to 70% of the people with disabilities are unemployed. In developing countries, that number raises to 80 to 90%, with only 10% having access to the devices they need. In the US, 18.7% of the population, which is 54.4 million people, which is the largest minority group in the US, are disabled. And that number will rapidly increase as my generation gets older, because 53% of people over 75 are disabled or have some disability. So with those numbers in mind, we can really appreciate the scale of this topic and this issue. And I'm curious to help define the topic a little bit more. Maybe, Elias, we can talk about what do we mean when we're talking about accessibility in tech and accessibility in the web?
This is one of the things I like to tell people, and JP has a great way of spinning it, where the issue of access is pretty universal. Even though we think of accessibility as something like in the web for screen readers, for specifically blind users, there's a lot of reasons we should think about access as something that we all rely on in different ways. JP, we use doors to access rooms, but if the door handles are too high, then no one can reach them. This same principle kind of applies to any UI you build for anyone, you have to think of how usable it is for the user you have at the time, whether it's someone who's disabled or not, using the tools, if they have the tools that they need to use the program that you've built. If they don't, then they can't use your program at all. They're locked out.
Right. Yeah, I think it makes me think when we talk about universal issue, just all the accessibility features I use, my mother who has hearing aids use, that at first glance seem like standard features, larger text, grayscale, motion reduction, and then you realize how many people would not be able to use that technology if that feature wasn't there, that I just find useful. And it shows that really good design often is both useful for everybody and lowers the handle, so to speak, so that more and more people can grab onto it.
You could think of it as lowering the barrier of entry to certain applications by having good usability and good accessibility in mind when you're designing from the beginning. That's why you have things like certain codes of conduct for building physical buildings now. There are rules you have to follow.
John Paul, I'm curious if you can speak to this. I know I haven't asked you before, but as an engineer who thinks so much about this, I'm curious your take.
Yeah, I mean, I think Elias described it really well. Obviously all people aren't disabled, but I kind of like to think about it like all users can be, depending on the context. So, you can be several different users throughout the day. Like right now, I'm JP on broadband internet with a mouse and a keyboard. But when I go out and ride my bike and I've got my iPhone, all of a sudden I'm not on a broadband connection. I don't have a keyboard. I don't have a mouse. So I still have the same physical abilities, but my contextual abilities, which combined with my physical abilities, define my user's abilities. Those change completely, right? So I think that's just kind of something to keep in mind.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
And while we talk about accessibility as a matter of one population, you have to think of the specific kind of user as having certain tools that they can't use, but other tools they must rely on. So you have to design with those tools in mind. And it's not as difficult as it probably feels if you design that way from the beginning. It's always harder to take down a building and rebuild it with ADA codes in mind than it is to just know those codes when you start.
Exactly.
Building.
Yeah, if it's built into the infrastructure and the planning.
What are some places that you think are doing a really good job with accessibility? What are the sites that are leading the market here in that kind of design?
I don't have very much data on that I've collected, but anecdotally, you find, for instance, a lot of the frameworks that are popular for building like CSS really quickly, like bootstraps and everything, a lot of them actually do take care to build accessibility in as a matter of the design for those frameworks. So a lot of websites that have that in mind do better than the average because those frameworks have done it for them. But I think it would be really important to teach developers the skill on their own in case they don't have to rely on a framework for that app, if there's no point in the scale of that application for a framework,
I would say A List Apart. Their website is phenomenal.
That's true.
In terms of accessibility. The WordPress admin is state of the art. It doesn't rely on JavaScript, doesn't rely on icon fonts. They have recently basically made a pledge to say that anything introduced into the WordPress core must meet the WCAG guidelines at level 2. So in other words, if it doesn't meet accessibility guidelines, they won't merge it into their core. So those are two examples that come to mind.
What did you guys, I don't know if you were familiar, but about a year ago now, a bunch of major tech companies like Facebook and Dropbox, Microsoft got together and made an initiative that was dubbed Teaching Accessibility. And the goal behind it was to specifically list on their resume, on the job posting, accessibility experience, seeking applicants with accessibility experience. And their mindset was, going forward, we know that this is a huge market for us and this is a lot of our users. So we need to be encouraging people in their education to be looking for ways to develop that specific skill set. But it seems to be really difficult, from my experience working, to find people who can empathize effectively with users. I'm curious what your thoughts are about how to develop the next generation of our engineers to actually be able to fill that new job requirement.
I mean, I personally think that developers should stand to start with like these access necessities as part of their basic training, as like level 1. Think of HTML as the thing that is what RA will read. That is what you have to work with. And JP has a lot more developed thoughts on this, so I guess I can just defer to him. But yeah, then go ahead, JP.
My favorite saying is accessibility is a blueberry muffin. You can't push the blueberries in afterwards.
That's true.
So it needs to be something thought of up front in the design process, just like when you're building a building, like Elias pointed out.
Which is how we think about for mobile first. I mean, at Thinkful,
Exactly.
we have that exact approach for mobility. It's true of a lot of features. SEO is a very similar way. It's like a lot of that is just very hard to add in later.
And they all are related. Accessibility, performance, SEO, they're all related.
SEO is a topic, accessibility is a topic that covers an enormous area. I mean, it's almost like saying HTML. What would you think about to start? So let's say I know very little about what it would mean if I were rebuilding my personal site to be.
Start with HTML. I mean, if you do the whole div ID equals empty app thing and put your content layer through your JavaScript layer, you just shot yourself in the foot and you'll never have an accessible experience. So if you start with HTML, I think you're about 85% there.
That leads to the benefits of progressive enhancement rather than single page applications, because they're impossible to crawl or to really make accessible.
Yeah.
There was something else I wanted to add there, but of course it's gone. So if you want to move us along, Ben, I guess that's fine too. Oh, I've lost Ben's audio. Oh dear.
I think I did too.
Can you hear me now?
Speaking as a different Ben, one of the things I say to a lot of my students is to actually go out and use a screen reader. Apple's got a really good one.
Yeah.
And surf the web for a day with a blindfold on. You'll learn a ton, and you'll learn how hard it is to use a screen reader, and so how vital it really is.
One thing, my experience before this with Apple was getting accessibility. Was getting accessibility training to be more inclusive in every training we did, as opposed to a standalone item. So when the Apple Watch came out, at first they wanted to teach the Apple Watch, and then a few months later teach about the accessibility features of the watch. But our store was such a centric location for clients with accessibility needs that it really hurt us to not know about these features up front. And one thing we found was the difficulty for retail employees to sell the watch to a customer that they really couldn't empathize with how they would use it. And so we were lucky to have this amazing woman named Kim Park, who was actually featured for various things. But she has a seeing eye dog, she's almost entirely deaf, and she sold at the Apple Store hundreds of watches. And what she talked about was understanding all the time-saving and easy features that the watch gave people, the ability to pay things with their wrist, and just how the wearable technology was a whole new market for people with disabilities in sight and hearing. And when she shared that insight, it really helped people reconceptualize what they were selling and what the value of it was for different people. And it really just had to do with her sharing her story to those rooms of people about how she was using the watch and why she was so excited about it. So I think a lot of times we're just not empathetically conscious to the point that we can act on it in an intelligent way and really tell the story.
JP, you asked the question, or you mentioned in the chat here, turn off JavaScript for one day a week and you'll realize how sites are built HTML first and which ones aren't, as in separating the wheat from the chaff when it comes to accessibility. What is it that's almost like helps you understand the quality of the HTML, but what are other good ways to replicate to put yourself as a developer in the shoes of someone with any number of different ways of accessing the web.
Well, I really like the point about, trying to use a screen reader every now and then. But, I kind of think back to like around 2009 when Flash started to go away and all of a sudden we had these little tiny computers in our pockets. And you remember how frustrating it was when you'd go to a website and it wasn't responsive and you couldn't use it very well? And you'd be sitting there going, this website's so frustrating, I can't use it. Well, that's what people that are in underrepresented groups, that's what their experience might be like on the day-to-day.
Yeah.
So think back to what that felt like, because what that is an accessibility issue, It's
And
like,
to capitalize,
yeah.
I'm sorry, to capitalize
ahead.
on what Benet was saying, I know I could talk to you guys for a long time about what personally technology has done for me. But technology is a thing that ameliorates a lot of issues with accessibility for a lot of people, and there's no significantly good reason why the web can't be a leader in this idea of amelioration, of making people have access to things they didn't have before. Technology has changed my life. The opportunity to become a developer has changed my life economically, which I have data on this as well, actually, for a broader example of the issue of economic realities. And I'm going to paste into the Slack group a link to the chart so you guys can see it on your own screens a little bit easier. And then I will also probably screen share if my computer will let me do it.
Now this is data. This is a chart you created. Or this is you found this?
I created the chart using data from the BLS.
Got it.
Services.
Yeah.
Services or statistics?
Statistics.
Yeah. Jeez.
Yeah. These numbers are crazy. I think I don't need to explain to anyone that this is just ridiculous. But what's astounding to me from this chart, from this data, which there's more at that link if you want to get more into what's going on. What's astounding to me is that a degree of some kind from college is not a meaningful guarantee of employment.
These are the employment. This chart. This is employment rates or
employment rates, like the percentage of people who've been surveyed in that group that is employed as of the survey.
Got it. So this is saying that only 25% of people with a bachelor's degree or higher, disabled people have full-time jobs.
Actually, I don't know if the data even includes what we would call meaningful employment, because you have to remember that it's legal in some cases to pay what I would refer to as prison wages to certain disabled workers. It's actually legal in some cases to pay sub-minimum wages to certain disabled workers, and I think that those can be counted as employed. So you have to keep that in mind while reviewing these numbers. But if you compare that to the employed rates of able-bodied people, it's completely astounding. And I wanted to bring this up, as I said before, because there are a lot of important issues of diversity that are getting covered, that are getting radar time, but disability is one that is not being sort of discussed in the same avenues, and I would love to see Thinkful be an example of how to tackle this problem.
I think it's an interesting case because we can look at stories like your own. You can learn this new skill set, right? I think Thinkful at being remote can be a really empowering or a really accessible school, right? Or a remote education, right? You can do it from home or you can do it from anywhere.
And that's exactly the thought I had when I wanted to join, because I couldn't go to a boot camp that was, brick and mortar. That wasn't going to happen for me. And now here I am, and I'm able to use what I've learned to make it so other people can learn it too. And that's what is important to me. And that's kind of what I've been stuck on when I realized this. It opened up my mind to the possibilities we can do for teaching and for changing these stats that we see here. One of the most meaningful things you can do is bring finances into a group of people and watch them thrive and watch them feel better and watch them have better quality of life in general.
Yeah, and also give them access to the rooms where decisions are being made, right?
Yeah.
If we have an issue right now where there's rooms of engineers who aren't thinking about accessibility, the greatest combat is ultimately going to get people in those rooms.
Yeah, especially people who are affected by these issues really, really severely. And like I said, here I am. I'm one person, and I think I can be. I don't think I'm at all an outlier of the odds of someone else learning to do this. Of other people, like dozens of people, suddenly realizing that they could do this and learn it and end up engineers like I am.
I hope so.
I've only seen a few things, but what are your thoughts on how what you might call more personal technology, or maybe like basically Apple Watch or iPhone or things that take a piece of technology and integrate it more closely into yourself, into your body? How do those affect or open new opportunities for accessibility?
The personal technologies like our portables and wearables and everything specifically.
Right, exactly.
I mean, if you think about things like this might be a bit far away from what you're asking, but the one most personal anecdote I can give is like if I'm traveling a new city, right, by myself, I have to be able to know where I can find places to rest. I have to be able to know where I can find places that have public transit because I don't drive. These are things that someone who's disabled in the past might not have known unless they had like done extensive research before leaving the house, which is not at all convenient. And if you're disabled or out somewhere strange and having a health problem, you can find help. You can find places to find shelter. There's all kinds of things. There's dozens of innumerable things you can say that have made lives better or safer with personal technology like this.
I would think the opportunity for entrepreneurship is also strong because there's a lot of areas where this is foreign to getting this right is foreign to many people. So being able to understand that user much more deeply is a huge advantage. And then with the advent with much cheaper access to tools, you can go a lot further with building new things in a much cheaper way. So reaching the market much more easily as well. You don't have to be. Stephen Hawking might have had the last 20 or 30 years of incredible cutting edge tech for being able to communicate, but being able to do that with a much cheaper option makes it accessible to magnitudes more people.
John just made a great point about how teaching at Thinkful is great for reaching underrepresented groups, those who have barriers to entry in other businesses and everything. And that's exactly true for what happened to me. Like I couldn't finish academia the way I wanted to because of barriers with my health, but here I am doing this and learning meaningful skills in a way that I couldn't have done at a traditional college. And I think if Thinkful, really doubles down on this principle that I know it believes in diversity, we can change a lot of lives. And this is just a focus on one of the groups that I think needs to be really talked about. I think Thinkful can do a great job, I believe. Where are you
living now, Elias?
I live currently, I say in Los Angeles because that's the biggest landmark I can give you, but I live in a nowhere town near Los Angeles, to be more exact.
Are there communities to the nowhere town or to the Los Angeles?
A few times.
Really?
Yeah, it's been a few different ones. All
all the nowhere towns are all.
Yeah.
Is there a community of developers in your area, or is that a group you can tap into? You can be a part of?
You know what? There is like nothing in this field in my city. I wish I was embellishing.
Yeah, I think that's I read this book a while ago called Steal Like an Artist. Really short read, recommend to anybody. And it makes a really solid point about with the internet and with all these ways that we can communicate outside of our physical location. We can just create friend groups and social networks that are so much larger than we could ever really walk. Or talk or Superman. So I think what makes me so excited about things like Slack and this podcast is that we can use them to share ideas. And I'm sure everyone here, if we sound it off, we're probably in at least 3 countries and 10 cities. People are here, 10, 8 cities. So I just think it's really exciting. I think internet itself is freeing from our location and from our bodies. And so the more ways that we can use it to come back into the practical lives that we're interacting with and make those things less embodied of experiences, the more freedoms we can spread to people over the world. And what
you said about the internet being freeing from someone's body is also a great point for usability. The user should not have to think about themselves and their body while they're using your product. If they have to think, then there's that principle by Steve Krug, don't make me think. And if your user who's disabled or even someone who's just has a specific need for a way to access a program has to think about their own body, then you've kind of you've made them do your job for you. You should have thought about their body and what they need, as a developer, as a designer, which is why it's so important to consider teaching these better practices for building in the future.
Yeah. It's an interesting parallel, I think. I have a friend who does, she made like a network through Planned Parenthood for people looking at transgender healthcare as they're transitioning in North Carolina. And the number one problem that she faced, and this is a very recurring issue for people looking for this sort of healthcare, is the people looking for the help are the ones having to educate their doctors about what they're looking for and what the process is like, which leaves amateurs doing, complicated doctors' work. And I think, the way to change it is to get people with the experience to raise the awareness, like you're doing today, Elias, and to just keep getting people into the rooms, right? Whether it's in a training capacity or awareness raising capacity, or it's actual engineers or doctors, whatever it might be in that situation. And a lot of that starts with empowering and removing the barriers to entry.
I agree totally.
Awesome.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was wondering, this is Casey Day speaking. So I was wondering, is there any, forums or any sites where people can actually voice their concerns for accessibility? Because, it'd be nice to know, outside of just employing someone that is disabled, to know how to design from an accessibility standpoint. It'd be nice to know if there's, a general consensus about things that needs to be worked on from an accessibility standpoint. Case in point, I have a friend who actually only has one hand. He lost his hand. He never wanted to tell me about how it happened, but he's a big gamer, and he actually bought a controller from this man named Beck, and it's a single-handed Xbox controller. And it's actually, I'll share a link to the guy's website because it's really ingenious how it works. And it's a nice thing, but there's things like this that you wouldn't even think of accommodating for, because I guess from that standpoint of not just Xbox but the general community, is that they think that everyone has two hands or two legs, so they should be able to play this game. They never think about there's a community of people.
It is very often an issue with assumptions. You assume that the average user, the mythical average user, has all the traits that you desire in a user, and people kind of forget that you can't really plan for averages. You should plan for edge cases, which is something we all learn as developers when we're testing. And while I would disagree with the assertion that people who are disabled are edge cases, you should still plan for them without assuming an average, because you will almost always get the average wrong.
Yes, exactly. But also Derek shared a link called Ally Project. Is that something?
Yeah, the ALMY project is a great central resource, and there's also the local accessibility in tech channel, which Ben and I started, which is great. And
that's in our student Slack channel.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, we're about out of time. This is really a fantastic podcast. I think one of the things Ben said at the very beginning struck me as more surprising, and I guess that's my ignorance. If you think that 14% of the U.S. population lives in poverty as being a shockingly high number, that number is 1 in 3 with people with disability in the U.S. And if you think that the unemployment rate in the single digits is a high number, that number is 50 to 70% of people with disabilities. That number rises 80 to 90% outside the U.S. Those are incredible numbers. As an entrepreneur, I think there's a lot of I see opportunity in those problems, but there's a lot more to it, obviously. So this has been a great podcast. Thank you for joining
awesome.
Podcast 3603 with our special host Elias, making it the best one. And Ben and I are gonna.
Thank you for having us, Elias.
Yes, thank you for having us.
It was so nice to have such esteemed guests on my podcast.
And thanks everyone for coming. I'm thrilled to see so many of you here. Awesome.
Thanks, guys. This is great.
See you next week.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Hey.